We're back with Galen Winsor, and we're talking about the nuclear scare scam. Galen, it seems to me that from what I've heard you say that the scaring of the people is better than a lock and key to keep this stuff out of the hands of those who might be interested in investigating and keeping this valuable material hidden for just an elite few.
This is probably the way that it works best. And so then the secret was to keep from letting other people know that it could be handled, because, first of all, we weren't accepted by the community, and the materials that we were working with, they feared. But there were certain few people that realized its real worth, its potential to be used in ways other than to support our national defense.
Let me ask you a question, Galen. Are you worried about do you have reason to be worried about your personal safety? Because the kind of people that you're describing here are powerful people. I wonder if you're still around. I wonder how much longer we can expect you to be in this game.
Well, on the 13th of December last year, the NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Region 5, turned out a federal SWAT team to get me on a federal warrant issued by Bob Thomas out of Walnut Creek, California. It was kind of funny in a way. They turned out this federal SWAT team at Hanford, and they had my picture, and alongside it says, "This is an irrational individual. He poses a threat to our security. Take him at any cost." Now, the reason that I'm still here only has one logical conclusion. I have lots of help.
Well, you've told us about how that you and others of your friends and colleagues have handled many times this so-called deadly nuclear energy material that the whole world is so scared of. Why weren't you afraid of it?
Because we did silly things like recover some of the undissolved fuel elements out of the redox dissolver that burned a hole in it. And we went in and sampled these things by a remote process. We got it out into our hands and found out that we could walk around the lab with them barehanded and they wouldn't hurt us. And we were standing there in the lab tossing them back and forth. Uranium metal that wouldn't dissolve in the boiling nitric acid. Well, if you find out that you can play with it, and it was only 90 days since that thing came out of the reactor, and it doesn't burn you, why should you be afraid of it?
So in other words, you're telling me that you learned to not be afraid of it because of practical use and application and hands-on experience.
Hands-on. We might even been playing games.
Okay, you say that you swam in this water that was straight from spent fuel used to cool that fuel, and
yes.
You swam in it.
Yep.
You told me earlier that you went a little bit beyond that. Would you share a little bit of that story?
Well, swimming in it didn't have the desired effect. So I decided I had to be more direct with these people that were giving me trouble. They were kind of hard to teach, so I went to drinking a glass of it a day. I had the bottle of it. Last time I went swimming, I filled this 2-liter bottle with water and washed it off on the outside in the shower when I washed me off on the outside so that we didn't tattletale. You know, radioactive material is just a trace or a tattletale. So you got to get it off so they won't know that you've been swimming in the pool and drinking the water. So I took this bottle in and set it on my desk. And who would suspect that the manager of Safety and Analytical Service had a bottle of spent fuel pool water sitting on his desk, and he drank a glass of it every day.
And this was unheard of.
Nobody ever did that crazy stunt before.
How has that affected you, Galen?
Well, as near as I can tell, it made me about 6'4" in my cowboy boots, 210 pounds, and really quite a nice fellow.
All right. What then happened as a result of your doing this strange experiment on your desk with this water? What was the result?
Can corporations have a heart attack? I think General Electric had one, because after they ran me through a whole body gamma scan in December of 1974, by the time I got out, because I had a plutonium lung burden and it took 45 minutes to an hour to count that, everybody on site knew that the manager of safety had been swimming and drinking in the swimming pool. the spent fuel storage pool, had cesium-137 at a ferociously high level. It even exceeded the NRC's limit. And I'd been drinking it. They knew the fat was in the fire. Now, where do we go from here? Well, first of all, I got a poison pen letter from the people in San Jose. They says, "Thou shalt not do those things. They'll find out that the inventory can be stolen." Well, that didn't sit very well with this cowboy, because nobody tells me what to do, particularly when what I do is right and hasn't harmed me. Who are they to tell me what I want to do? It just didn't sit very well. I was going to do something about that.
What was your motive in this?
Correct information. As an expert in the measuring system, why, it was very obvious that I knew the parameters of inventory control, the disintegration rate of each of these isotopes, how to measure them. That's how we regulated our inventory. And to have these rascals come along and start playing games with the information that I was very expert in, that I had designed the analytical system for this plant around, disturbed me a little bit. No, it made me fighting mad, and I got angry. And I have to admit, in retrospect, that for the next 5, 6 years, I was more than angry. I was hard to live with. Just ask my wife.
Well, in your estimation, then, how dangerous is a nuclear reactor plant?
A nuclear reactor plant is just a way to boil water that's the cleanest, neatest, most economical way to boil water that you've ever seen. And so, in my estimation, nuclear reactors ought to be insured under the same insurance policy as any other steam boiler plant, power generating plant. And to have special consideration under the Price-Anderson Act means that the insurance industry has already paid off the Congress so that they can have a ripoff, charging ever in higher and higher insurance premiums, total coverage much, much greater for a non-existent risk. What a racket.
Can a nuclear plant explode?
Only like any other steam plant. Like Laughlin, Nevada had a steam explosion. It's a coal-fired plant, but 6 men were killed there last year. That could happen at a nuclear plant, but as far as an atomic explosion, good heavens, no. No way.
What kind of accidents can actually happen at a nuclear reactor generator plant?
You could lose your moderator, and the reactor would shut down, the control rods would stick in, and you wouldn't be able to start it up. You might do several things that would invalidate some of the safety controls. For instance, an emergency core cooling system. The only reason they put ECCS on a reactor is to destroy it. When you start these big babies up, because they're so big, you only warm them up 50 degrees an hour. And they say, we got an emergency, throw the emergency core cooling system on like they did at 3 Mile Island 2, and you're going to thermally shock that big machine and ruin it so it can never be used again.
Let's talk about 3 Mile Island. What really happened there? We've heard all kinds of stories about meltdown, and they made movies on it that this meltdown could melt right through the earth, clear through to China, and we've seen a lot of scare stories. What really happened at 3 Mile Island? Do you know what really happened there?
Yes, I do. I followed that one very closely. In fact, I know the guys personally who wrote the script for China Syndrome and also wrote the script for the 3 Mile Island fiasco. Dale Breidenbaugh, Dick Hubbard, and Greg Miner, who used to work with me at General Electric, are the MBH associates that wrote that China Syndrome script. And not only that, remember that was the time China Syndrome came out, Jane Fonda starring. 14 months ahead of the TMI-2 accident, it was predicted in writing in New York State that that accident would happen 1 year from the date that that 3 Mile Island 2 reactor started up. It started up in March 1978, and it went down March 28, 1979, right on the day, 1 year anniversary. In other words, with 14 months advance notice, the industry still went along with the sham. Nothing happened there except that the owner, the operator, and the regulators conspired to turn it off.
What melted?
The top of the fuel rods, the third time that the core got uncovered, due to internal pressure, blew the top off some of those rods. They've got Inconel springs in them to keep the pellets, fuel pellets, from vibrating when it's running. Those things are under compression, and when they reduced the outside pressure and the fuel rods were still hot, it blew the top off some of those fuel rods. The fuel rods in TMI-2 are internally pressurized to about 1200 psi with helium gas so that they don't reverse dent when they're hot and running for 5 years. And when they drop the outside pressure, why, that internal pressure with those hot rods blew the side out of some of those rods at the top. But melting, the fuel is already an oxide ceramic. It is a pellet. It's been pressed into a ceramic. When you pick it up and feel it, it feels like metal. It's pressed so very, very tight, hard. And so, no, the fuel didn't melt. The China syndrome is a scriptwriter's fantasy. Right here, I ought to tell a story, I guess. See, I spent 3 weeks on the island in March of 1981, the 2-year anniversary of this particular, quote, accident. And Tom Hall, who stood alongside Enrico Fermi when they pulled the control rods on 100B in October 1944 at Hanford, and I were delegated to go to the island and find out what happened, and so we did. We went over all of the records and everything else, and near as we could tell from performance records, 51 thermocouples, for instance, only one of which went over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The center line temperature of those rods when they're running is 4,032 degrees Fahrenheit. And so they say things like over 50% of the core was greater than 4,000 degrees. Yes, it was. If it wasn't running at 100% power. So they take that kind of information and bugger it all up so that you don't understand what's going on. They give you a little bit of it. Well, the worst joke that people could dream up, and they says, do you know what the NRC's worst nightmare is? No, I don't know what that is. Galen Winsor and Tom Hall in the TMI-2 control room for an hour by themselves. You know why people that know laugh? These crazy guys from Hanford would have started that baby up and showed that it would run. We'd have started it up, and they were afraid of us.
So there was no accident at 3 Mile Island?
No, they did it on purpose. Shut her down.
Very interesting. Can nuclear radiation cause mutation in people and animals?
If a cell gets too much radiation, it dies. And so if it is a sperm or an ovocyte, why, they die. They don't reproduce, and there are no mutations. I think the good Lord built that safety factor in.
So you're saying that mutation in future generations is an unfounded fear?
Yes, and the studies of the people at Hiroshima and Nagasaki have borne that out. Those people do not have that. Now, they showed the immediate effects of too much radiation. The women who were pregnant showed, the embryo showed the effects of very similar to rubella, measles. Some deformity, certainly, from that radiation insult. But that's not the kind of mutation that's going to go on to the next generation.
Galen, what and where are these burial sites, and what's in them for this so-called nuclear waste? I've been hearing stories about stainless steel containers buried in concrete under the ocean, boiling for over 2,000 years. That
sounds like a real story. Let me start out by saying there are no nuclear waste, only materials created in a reactor to be recovered and used beneficially. Now, high-level waste is radioactive and self-heating. And so fuel, reusable uranium fuel, fits that definition. But if you disregard its intrinsic worth, why then, yeah, it would fit the definition of high-level waste. But let's say there isn't any high-level waste, only material to be recovered and used beneficially. Then what's the low-level waste fiasco? That's an excuse for a federally mandated, non-inspectable disposal system so that organized crime can get rid of any evidence that they want and it can never be dug up again.
They're afraid to look in there.
Not afraid. They don't want you to. They've got rules on the transport so that if you have an accident with a low-level radioactive waste shipment, why, you call out all of the state police and you make sure that nobody looks at it, that nobody gets exposed, that there's no spreading of the contaminated material. And it's also that you don't find out whose body's in that drum. The situation got so bad that the smell of human flesh was so great that they made it so that you could ship animal biological waste in refrigerated vans so that it wouldn't stink up before you got it buried.
What is then in these low-level or high-level or whatever containers under the ocean?
Nothing. But if you see, they were one time dropping barrels of radioactive waste off barges in the ocean. Do you know what was in them? Not high-level self-heating radioactive waste. Probably had a few bodies and a few guns and a few knives and a few evidences in them too. If you drop them in the ocean, they are truly disposed of. So you know there's an international trade in that right now? You can't do it in the United States, so they transship it across the ocean to South Africa and they can bury it offshore. So what is in those drums?
Well, that's what you're telling me then, that I needn't worry about boiling drums under the ocean for 2,000 years.
No, no way.
Thank you. I'm glad to know that. Well, one more question, Galen. What do you feel like a good portion of these men in Congress know this already?
I know they do. I went there 4 years ago and sat down with the Senate legal staff and told them my hour-and-a-half-long sad story, and Sam Bollinger, one of the lawyers, stood up and he says, "Galen, if I understand you right, why, you want us to have President Reagan snap his finger and make this thing come up straight." And I says, "Hey, Sam, terrific. Go ahead and do it." He didn't take that challenge. He says, "No, I'll tell you what, Galen. Industry likes it the way that it is." I said, "Sam, you really know how to hurt a guy." And he says, "Well, if we change it, what are we going to do for an encore?" Yeah, they're fully aware that this thing goes on as far up as the President of the United States. It's the way that industry wants it. The industry is its own problem then.
So the question is then, what is the industry? What is the real story here? Is this an industry of nuclear energy?
The industry has been ripping it off for years and years. In 1975, we knew that large nuclear reactors were dead, that large is not the way to go. The way to go is small, mass-produced nuclear reactors sitting right in the middle of town, one every 10 blocks, producing power. We haven't built a reactor right yet. It's time that we do it. Why haven't we? Because of a federal energy cartel. These guys control the amount of electricity, the availability, and the price. And they say, you do not have a choice. I have a choice. I'm going to take one of those decommissioned nuclear subs up in Puget Sound, refuel it, and generate my own electricity. Save the government $5 million because that's what they want to throw them away. I will use it for my own power plant. Quinn Millian up in Omak, Washington, and I are moving on that, and if one of these days I hook one of them up to Pier 91 in Seattle, don't be surprised.
Well, good luck.